Hello, macroeconomics. My name is John Harvey, and I'm your instructor. As you may notice, I'm in a third different room for videoing. Alex got back from Berkeley and is self-quarantining and has now blocked my access to the original video area. So this is actually Meg's room, who is still in Arizona. Here, have a look around. Let's see here. Maybe put the camera off of here. All right. I got a bunch of wires hooked to the camera because I like to keep it on the AC. There's our backyard. Here is my wargaming table where I am currently fighting the naval war of World War II. About to have Pearl Harbor. Very exciting. There's the game itself right there. Here are Meg's bookshelves. Big Harry Potter fan. Also a huge nerd. There's all her Dungeons and Dragons books. So ashamed of her. What else we got here? There's a copy of Pandemic. We just bought that, like right before the big crackdown. Melanie really liked that. I guess that's about it. Oh, since Meg moved out, we took the bed out. Well, it was a sort of a trundle bed. Is that what you call it? Anyway, we use that to watch the big screen TV here for Netflix and so forth. When Meg comes home, we do relinquish control of her room. But in the meantime, we've been using it for a little media room. Okay, let me get this back on there and tighten that down. Okay, and is it still recording? Had a funny thing happen just now. I made like an hour and a half of Contending Perspectives videos without having to press the record button. So I was really happy about that. I don't know if you remember in this class, I did several videos without having turned the microphone on. So I'm very sensitive about that right now. It's all working. All right, exam 3 material. Man, I've been looking forward to this. Now, I just brought in my notes and then I don't know where I set them down. Oh, I wanted to show you this first. All right, so here are the first study questions for the next exam. And as you can see, they're all reading questions. It's from an article by a guy named Steve Keen, who won the Revere Award as the person who most accurately forecast a financial crisis. And when I was putting this class together, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, it's been a long time since I had taught intermediate macro. And I thought, well, if I was taking intermediate macro, I'd sure want to hear about the model built by the guy who was known as the one who most accurately forecast a financial crisis. So here you go. So I only have you read a bit of it. It gets very technical, but again, I thought it would be very useful, and it's post-Keynesian. And as it says here in the sort of introductory section, you can safely assume that if Paul Davidson had it in the book, Steve Keen agrees. So we're sort of starting from that point. And Keen here is focusing on the financial sector. So once again, more stuff on the financial sector, and in particular on Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. Now, Minsky said that in the early stages of an expansion right there, everyone's pretty cautious. So their ratio of debt to income remains in a sort of a safe range. Then as the expansion goes on, people start thinking, man, I've been way too safe. I should borrow more money and start another company. And banks are also thinking, yeah, you ought to do that. So as a consequence, over the course of the economic expansion, firms tend to become, well, the entire financial sector finds itself in an increasingly fragile position. That's why it's his financial instability hypothesis. And this happens time after time. So here, let me show you here on the whiteboard. Let's see here, how much you can see. All right, that'll work. Remember, how much of that can you see? All right, gotta get the chair out of the way. That'll work. So here's the opening stage of the expansion down here. There's your early part. Mid, late, and of course that's recession, and that's recession over here. Then down in here, firms tend to be and banks, because they're the ones that have to agree to loan the money, tend to be fairly safe. And then as we move on here, so the financial sector is becoming increasingly fragile, exactly when we don't want them to, all right? Because what's going to end up happening is that, as you know, once they saturate the market for physical capital and the recession starts, the recession is going to start right when firms are in the most dangerous, and consumers and banks, in the most dangerous position. So that's a basic part of the argument. And let me go back here to the study question and talk about it a little bit more. Let's see. Best understood by considering the early stages of an expansion where the economy is growing and still cautious. This means that most projects succeed. Now remember from exam 2, this is when people are going to be pleasantly surprised by what happens and be encouraged to invest even more, which is precisely what this says. What two things gradually become evident to managers and bankers? I'm not going to tell you exactly because it's easy to look up. But the basic idea is that now they are very pleasantly surprised and they start investing more and taking on more debt. Now, 86. The general decline in risk aversion that accompanies early expansion sets off what in terms of investment and the price level of assets? And he means financial assets here, by the way. In actual economic writing, economists are not always real careful about differentiating between physical and financial investment because they kind of figure if you're an economist reading this economics article that you know the difference. That you can figure it out from context clues. So he's not careful about that here. And of course, as you can imagine, there's going to be a big jump in the price level of financial assets here as this takes place. And why is the external finance needed to fund these undertakings forthcoming? Well, banks agree. They think everything looks great. So during the euphoric economy, and I'm going to go back over here, sort of point at, here was early expansion, which is we already talked about in class. This is when people are very pleasantly surprised. And then over here, that's the euphoric economy. Now people aren't surprised because they expected it to be great, and it is great. All right. So now let's go back to the study question here. During the euphoric economy, what important actor in Minsky's drama is created? And although their servicing costs exceed cash flows, how do they expect to profit? Man, I love this, all right? And this is the Ponzi financier. Back over here. The Ponzi financier, all right? He says that there are 3 classes of economic agents in terms of how much debt they're carrying. There is hedge, speculative, and Fonzie. Fonzie, I'm sorry, that's an old TV show. Ponzi. And the hedge are the ones that are being really careful, that they are easily able to meet their monthly payments sort of thing. Speculative, they're getting a little bit more, but Ponzi, they've gone into so much debt that they're having to borrow just to meet their monthly payments, all right? So in order to meet monthly payments, they're actually borrowing money just to cover it. Why on earth, there's a set of weights down here that I never use, but I have to move right now. Why on earth would somebody do that? All right, so let's go back over here to the study question, then I'll come back to the board. Gee, should I turn this light off here? That's right in the middle of that one. And I don't know if it's this light. Yes, it is. Good, that helps, all right. How do they expect to, even although their servicing costs exceed their cash flows, all right? What that means is that they're not even making enough money to make the monthly payments. Now, those lights there are from, crap. Is that enough light to see? Oh, no, not really. Hang on, let me turn these other lights on. Oh yeah, I've got this one turned off too. Oh, that's the fan. Okay, any glare? No, that works. Okay, good. All right, so they have borrowed so much money that they can't, that how much they're earning isn't allowing them to meet the monthly payments. Why on earth would you do that? Fascinating stuff. Now, he's thinking in particular here of people borrowing to buy financial assets, of basically entering the market and buying on a margin. That you can buy $1 million worth of stocks with $100,000. Because the idea is that the bank is going to take that position for you, and so long as the position doesn't lose more than how much you've deposited in the account, which is $100,000, then you're still making money. So I don't know if you've seen the fantastic movie Trading Places, but at the end of the movie there is a margin call, which is because oh no, I don't want to ruin it. I'm sorry. I'll say no more. Good movie. Funny movie. So anyway, these people are borrowing in order to buy financial assets. Why would you do that? Why would you go into so much debt that you have to keep borrowing just to meet the monthly payment? All right, so here's time and price. And let's say that a financial asset has been up to time period T sub 1 rising at this rate, right? And you're thinking, oh man, it's going to keep going. And when it reaches time period T sub 2, I'm going to make a killing, all right? So you're expecting this trend to continue. And you're thinking, geez, I don't care if I got to borrow money to, remember, I've used this example before in class. What if you had traveled to the future and you knew who was going to win the Super Bowl? How much money would you bet? Every penny you could. You would borrow money, all right? And that's what this is. You would borrow money to bet on the Super Bowl, knowing you could easily pay it all back the day after the Super Bowl, right? So that's what's happening here. They're thinking, oh my gosh, they don't know with certainty, but with enough certainty, they're thinking that it's going to end up here. So they're in so much debt that they have to keep borrowing, but they're not worried. Well, and they're not worried yet. Now, think about this. What happens, though, if even the slope changes? You don't even have to have a decline. You just have a change in the slope. The slope comes down. What if it's true that at P sub 3 right there, on the green one, yeah, now I can't pay the payments back? What do you do? What do you do when the slope of this price increase changes, when it drops down, and you think to yourself, crap, I'm not going to be able to pay it off now? You sell. You and all your other people participating in the market also sell, so it actually ends up doing this, all right? It ends up falling because people sell, and that's not a good situation, all right? This is when the Ponzi financier gets wiped out. Sorry, my computer went to sleep here. Oops, that's not my password. But that is, okay. So, but the reason they expect to make money, zoom in a little, that's okay, that'll work. Make money despite the fact that they're having to borrow just to make the monthly payments, is that they expect the price to continue to rise, all right? And then they're going to sell, and as a matter of fact, what it says in the article is, they expect to profit by anticipated capital appreciation far exceeding the interest bill. Now, this has an application in the housing crisis, in the financial crisis. Because one of the things that they were telling home buyers was, don't worry, it's not exactly the same situation, but it's analogous. And of course, there were financial assets linked to these decisions. People were buying houses at T sub 1. And some of them were buying these with balloon payments, which means that the payments were really small at first, and then they were going to make up for it later. And the home buyers said, well, what if by the time the balloon payments kick in, say around T sub 2, what if I can't afford the balloon payments? And the people trying to talk them into buying the houses say, don't worry. If the price of the house keeps increasing like it has done so far, just sell the house. Just sell the house at P sub 2 up here and you'll make a killing. And for a while, it worked. But when the price of housing started to even, again, it doesn't even have to fall. It just has to slow down, all right? Then none of that works anymore. Now the capital appreciation is not going to exceed the interest bill, and now we have a wave of oh gosh, what do you call it when you can't pay your bills? Not foreclosures. A wave of not being able to pay your bills. All right. Default. A wave of default. All right. All right. So that's 87. 88. How does the decrease in firm viability check the asset price boom? And then what happens to the euphoria in the boom. Okay. Now, what he's talking about there is, and a lot of this stuff you have to, I mean, this is an article written for other economists. By the way, he wrote this article back in 1995, all right? And he ends up using it to predict the financial, oh, I'm sorry, that was off the screen. In 1995, and he uses it to predict a financial crisis that takes place in 2007-8. How'd that happen? Well, he had kind of forgotten about the article. And he was doing some expert testimony, which means he was, testifying in court. Economists can make money off of doing stuff like, if Bob hadn't been killed, then his lifetime income would have been $3 million. So that's what the company owes him. So he was doing something. He was doing something with respect to a contract. And he said that the next day in court, he was going to say something. He's Australian. I was going to say something about Australian private sector debt going up exponentially. And he said, I don't know that that's true. I guess I ought to look it up. So he looked it up. He's like, wow, it is true. Private sector debt has been really increasing very rapidly. And then he thought, but wait a minute. I wonder about the United States. Surely it's not as bad there. It's like, oh my God, it's worse. All right. So this whole idea that the debt to income ratio was rising really quickly. He got to looking at stuff back in 2006, I believe it was, and said that the ratio or the ratio of debt to income in the United States, and this is private sector, not public sector. This is not government debt. This is private sector debt, was rising so fast that we were soon going to have a crisis. So he dropped everything he was doing, started a blog called Debt Deflation Blog or something like that, started warning people there was going to be a financial crisis based on the model that he had built back in 1995. So I'll show it to you in just a second. All right, so let's see. We're down to, how does the decrease in firm viability check the asset price boom? What does he mean by decrease in firm viability? And what I started to tell you was, he's writing this for other economists, so there's a lot of stuff he's not mentioning, because he's taking it for granted that you know it. And what he means is something we've already talked about in class, that eventually here in the expansion, you're going to get a decline in profits. All right, that firms are not going to do as well at the top there because people have stopped investing. Remember that up in here, there's a decrease in investment because firms are reaching their target levels of capacity, which also means that their sales go down, which means their profits go down. So the firms are not as viable, is what he's trying to say. And of course, that's going to stop the increase in the financial asset prices, which is not a good thing. Then you can read the rest of the section there. All right, in what two ways, I'm sorry, let me go back to over here. And you can still see it. It's the last question on that page. In what two ways does the picture of a bust, of this collapse here, change when there's a big government involved? Well, what he's talking about is what we're seeing right now, is that in a well-developed economy like ours, then the collapse in cash flows can be partly helped by government spending, and the collapse in financial asset prices can be partly stopped by the Federal Reserve. But you can read the section to get the more specific answer there, but that's the basic answer. Now, pardon me as I walk across the screen here and go to the next page. We're almost done with this article here. Here are the last two. Here are the last two questions based on that Keene article, 90 and 91. All right, 90. Keene says that his model suggests that any policies aimed at lowering interest rates once the collapse has occurred will be futile. If you may recall, you were a little kid then, but we lowered interest rates to pretty much zero, and it did very little good. Because he's saying that at that point, the economy has passed into the catastrophic region, and the weight of accumulated debt upon a depressed economy. If anyone knows about debt, it's college students. If the weight of the accumulated debt upon a depressed economy is so great that any government action at that time may be too little, too late. So he says, what are the essential essential policy message of the financial instability hypothesis, and what institutional arrangements are necessary? Very important study question. All right, first of all, he says, what he emphasizes in the article is we have to avoid the crises in the first place. Now, when I first read that, I thought, well, that's kind of dumb, obviously. We want to avoid them in the first place. But what he means is, as I got to thinking about it, what he means is, okay, let's say that your car has a flat tire. Well, it's not the end of the world. You can change the flat tire. It's not that big a deal. All right. So yeah, it would be better to avoid the flat tire in the first place. But the cost of actually having the flat tire is not that high. All right. What about a plane crash? Once the plane crashes, then the cost is extremely high. There's nothing we can do about it, right? So he's thinking of this like a plane crash, that we have passed into a, there's really very little we can do to repair the damage that was just caused. That, as you said in the previous study question, that you pass into this region where the weight of accumulated debt is so great that, it's this study question. Government action may be too little too late. So avoid them in the first place. How do you do that? By developing and maintaining institutions and policies that enforce a good financial society in which the tendency by businesses and bankers to engage in speculative finance is constrained. So consistent with what we did up to exam 2, you want to constrain speculative activity, all right? That we need to create institutions that constrain speculative activity. These institutional arrangements must include close and discretionary supervision of financial institutions, all right? So close and discretionary. Let me tell you why that's important in this context. He's saying, I believe our dinner is being delivered, and that's why the dog is going insane. Blue Mesa tonight. So we're doing our best to support the local restaurant industry. And Melanie is now trying to calm the dog. The close and discretionary regulation. All right. As I've already told you, we didn't pay much attention to what was going on in the financial sector leading up to the financial crisis. That, what's her name? The chair of the Fed, not at the time, but afterwards. I can picture her. Anyway, I'll come to me in a minute. Janet, oh my God. That was her name. And she said, hey, we had all the rules in place that we needed to stop the financial crisis. We just didn't enforce them. They weren't paying much attention. All right? So we need to pay closer attention. That is the part where Keynes says, and by the way, again, this is written in 1995. He's just bringing it up again right before the financial crisis. But he's already saying back in 95, we need close supervision, all right, and discretionary supervision. What that means is don't just depend on a set of rules you set up ahead of time. There are going to be things you didn't expect. That it is part of what you do in the financial sector is to figure out ways around the regulations. That's what you're going to try to do. You're going to try to make up new financial assets that don't fall into a category. You're going to try to put things off the books so that nobody can see exactly what you're doing. So you have to be able to make discretionary rule, not rules and not choices, rulings. That's what maybe on the spot. So we can't figure out a set of rules and say, no, it'll take care of itself. No, we got to watch closely, and we have to be ready to make new rules at any given time. And so the last thing he says on this one, we must have a bias towards income equity rather than inequality. When income is unequal, people go into debt. And I know you've seen a lot about this over the last roughly decade or so, about how much the income distribution in the United States has changed, and the rich are getting much richer relative to the poor. And so as a consequence, who's borrowing money to buy stuff is the people down the bottom. And so he's saying one of the ways that you prevent the increase in debt is to make sure that people have the money to buy the stuff in the first place. Now, let's see. And then 91, the last one. In closing, Keynes says that the chaotic dynamics in his paper should warn us against what? Accepting a period of relative tranquility in a capitalist economy as anything other than the lull before the storm. Because, as Minsky said, stability creates instability. When things feel like they're going well and safe, people take on more risk. So that the stability creates instability. And I mentioned to you, and I was going to show you a bit of his paper. I happened to just finish those Contending Perspectives lectures, and one of them talked about Steve Keen. Oh, wrong place. One of them talked about Steve Keen and had a little bit of a summary of his paper, and here it is. Is it coming up? Yeah, it is. All right, let's see here. I need F5, right? Okay, the beginning part here is not what we want for intermediate macro. Let's go back here to Keene. There. Here's a piece talking about him. Let me slide this up a little bit. Here's a piece talking about him winning the Revere Award for being the person who most accurately forecast the financial crisis. I believe it mentions here, it was 2005. December 2005, drawing heavily on his 1995 theoretical paper, he was convinced that a financial crisis was fast approaching. And he won by like a margin of over 2-1 next to the next closest competitor. Here's the paper. All right, now I don't expect you to exactly see what this is here, but let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so it's a bunch of equations, right? As one might imagine. He's laying out the financial market. Here's a profit equation. Here's bankers' income, capitalist debt being used to finance investment, interest rates, and on and on, right? So he's putting all this together, and then he runs the computer simulation, and this big collapse right here, that's us. He was saying that once the level of debt to income gets to a certain rate, then the economy collapses, all right? And it's very difficult to recover after that. And so that's the Keene stuff. Let me now back out of that and go back to the study questions. And what we're going to do next, man, I've been dying to do this. Let me zoom back out a little bit so you can see the whole screen. That's the opposite, John. The economics of Michael Koleski. Let me tell you, first of all, that's misspelled. I only learned recently he spelled it M-I-C-H-A-L. So I want to apologize to all of Michael Koleski's relatives who may still be alive. And so this is, oh man, okay, I'll just shut up. We'll do it in a minute. I think my dinner has been delivered, so I'm going to stop right here, but then we're going to do the economics of Michael Koleski, and there's so many fascinating things about it. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.